speaker is there's a black Honda Civic in the parking lot with its lights on. So I'll leave that with you. Our next speaker is Andrea Stiller from Fraser Health Authority, and Andrea's going to share with us a case of psittacosis that was reported under the program that Eleni just described. Andrea?
Thank you. So I'm just going to share with you my experience with this, using the new reportable zoonosis guidelines. It was a great experience, actually. So first of all, this is what I was following up on. It's not chicken, it's pigeon. So this was a case where we received a report on psittacosis or chlamydiosis in birds, and we followed the guidelines. And a few things, background on this is we had to follow the steps that were laid out in the guidelines, as Eleni mentioned, the reason for surveillance, the reporting, public health response, outbreak management, and risk assessment. So we did receive a report from the chief veterinary officer through to BC-CDC, through to a medical health officer, and then eventually myself. And we did follow these steps. So these steps with the reporting and timelines, it did state in there that there was a 24-hour reporting stage, and that is something that we'll talk about later. Preventing transmission to humans, mitigating the ongoing source of infection, and facilitating early diagnosis and treatment. So that's part of our public health requirement. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the farm. I'm going to actually go through these ones. So the young birds, this is a picture of the young birds. So on the farm, I did visit the farm eventually, and just one second here, there we go. So pigeons are not common meat bird in North America, but they have been around the world for a long time. And locally, there have been pigeon farms that have come and go, and there's been even like pyramid schemes based on pigeon farming, if you can believe it. In Eastern Canada, there was a thing called the Pigeon King scheme. So locally, there is demand in restaurants, mostly within the Asian market, for young pigeon meat, 21 to 28-day-old birds. And then older birds that are not successful breeders, can be sold into the South Asian market, where there's more thorough cooking of the meat because it's not as tender. And there is a requirement that for processing, specialty equipment is required because they don't fit into the same equipment that chickens would fit into because they're smaller birds. So these birds are purchased as young birds, and the farm we visited, or were involved with, was in the process of building their breeding stock. So they had pens, and they would put them in the pens together where they would find their mates. So this is the pen where they will spend the first up to 4 months of their life until they find a partner, at which point they will be then transferred into a smaller pen. So that once they have a partner, a brood pair will be established, and they will stay together. They will start nesting, and they'll lay 2 eggs at a time, approximately 11 times a year. So that will be a successful breeding pigeon. And these pigeons will grow very quickly within these first 4 weeks, up to about 1.3 pounds, and at that point they'll be ready for the dinner table. So I did talk to the vet initially, and we did look at some of the information from the guidelines, and chlamydiosis in birds affects all the avian species, or can affect them. It's most commonly associated with the psittacine or parrot-like birds, and pigeons will have a 10 to 30% positive, be found positive 10 to 30% of the time. It's an illness that can be unapparent in the birds, so exposure for people could could be ongoing because the birds can appear healthy, and the organism can be shed intermittently. The shedding can be exacerbated by stress factors, so including reproductive activities and things like that. And the organism can stay in the environment in the litter and debris for up to a month. So that's an important part of the farm practices to be able to deal with that. And for people, we would be affected with fever, chills, headache, loss of appetite, sore throat, and it may lead to atypical pneumonia. So in a lot of cases, it's not a serious illness or it wouldn't be recognized, but there are the rare cases that can lead to systemic illness, and they figure that prior to antibiotics, that 15 to 20% of people that would have been infected were reported to have died. This is in the past and it's just reported, so I don't know how long ago that actually happened. This is the, so yes, birds and humans can both be treated with antibiotics. So this is a picture I've just thrown in of the nesting boxes. So when the pigeons make their brood pair, this is where they're going to be moving to. And they have divided sections. You can see they have a little divider between the two sections, so they'll have their young birds on one side and then they can start preparing a nest on the next side. So Fraser Health activity was, so we contacted the vet, which was within the guideline recommendations, confirmed that the birds were actually co-infected with canker, and as well as the chlamydiosis. So the actual original diagnosis was for the canker. That's why the birds were brought in. There was increase in mortality, and the local vet brought 4 birds and euthanized them and diagnosed this canker, and then forwarded the birds on because she had a suspicion that there was more going on. And they were eventually diagnosed with the chlamydiosis as well. We contacted Vancouver Coastal Health Authority, and that was because the first vet who had contact with the farm had suggested that because these were valuable breeding birds, that there was a specialty bird vet in Vancouver who would be able to help them, who might be able to help them further. So we had to find out if that had happened, and Vancouver Coastal contacted the Vancouver vet and found out that she had never in fact seen the birds and never handled them. So that was one exposure that could be crossed off the list. We also contacted WCB because they would be dealing with the workers. There were workers on this farm, and we were able to confirm that when we talked to the farm manager. And the farm manager did state there was the manager, a co-owner, and 2 employees that were present on the farm, that nobody had been sick, and that because this was a newer business and they were in the process of building their breeding flocks, that they had never sent birds to slaughter. And that was important because it took out a whole another step of where these birds had traveled to. The Fraser Valley vet that I spoke to had provided information to the farmer about contacting, say, the bird vet in Vancouver, and information about cleaning and disinfecting and treating the birds, and did note that it would be difficult to get this infection out of this population of birds. The Vancouver vet did provide treatment. Over a 2 to 3 week period, the birds were treated with metronidazole for the canker. So the birds weren't actually ever treated for the psittacosis or the chlamydiosis. And she figures that she provided enough antibiotics to treat about 3,000 birds, which there were about 5,000 birds on the property in different barns. So that's something that kind of was interesting. And the treatment with metronidazole was based on that these were non-food supply birds. These were birds that were only going to be used for breeding. The Animal Health Center apparently contacted CFIA, which the vet advised me, and I think that's what the guidelines also stated. So WCB did visit the farm, and they were able to review the personal protective equipment with the staff, and they said they did have equipment on site, which was good. And they were provided work safety information in general. There was temporary foreign workers at the property, and there were language barriers with the owners and as well as the staff. I did visit the farm and just to see what it was like to get these pictures. And the manager advised that these birds had in fact recovered and everything was great, and there had been no staff illness. We did provide one of our public health responsibilities was to provide information to the people that may have been affected, and we did put together a one-page information sheet that the clients could bring to their doctor, and because we were concerned because of language barriers, so we sent that to them by email. So the things that we found were really good was that the guidelines were really easy to follow, and they were all laid out step by step, and that was really wonderful, not having to go search for the information and what's correct, what's current. And as you can see, Fraser Health was tagged in all 3 of these upcoming. And so we're, I guess, constantly going to be with the farming community, the broader animal contact. That's something that we'll be getting. So this is going to be, I think, really useful for us. The things that I wondered about for future was the reporting time. The original report, I think, was around the 28th of August, and we got the information well into September. So there was certainly more than a 24-hour delay there, even if it had gone through multiple steps. WCB was not familiar with this illness, so that was something, and they'd like to find out more, so that's something that might be included, I don't know, in the future. I was curious in terms of following up with the bird health, because I don't know who actually does that. Neither of the vets involved had ever been on this property, and only one of the vets ever saw any of the sick birds. So in terms of whether or not there are still sick birds there, you know, that's something that I don't know who would look into that, or if they would, being that in the end they're going to be on someone's dinner plate. And and just follow up to ensure that when the birds are at the age of slaughter, that they are in fact antibiotic free if they're being continually treated. We don't know if they'll be continually treated with the metronidazole or if there's going to be other treatments. So that would be something that I was curious about. And I think there's one of the first little baby birds that has been born at the farm in the little basket at the back, because they didn't have those nesting boxes ready at the time. See, if you can see him, the little guy, he's right up at the top there. Okay, any questions?
Good. Thank you, Andrea. So certainly, there was a delay in reporting this case, and that's prompted us at the Ministry of Agriculture to review our internal processes for reporting. Any questions, including questions from the webinar participants, please feel free to send an email to Kirsten, and we'll be happy to read it out. Do we have any yet, Kirsten? Nope. Okay, on the floor, any questions? Sure, Stefan.
I'm just curious to know, exposure-wise, do you know where it came in? Like they had breeding pairs from another farm come to that farm? And
Yeah, so because they think they're infected with that asymptomatically, they're just, it's in the environment, it's in their litter, and it's really hard to get out of the environment. And I guess there wasn't really biosecurity at the farm. Everything was pretty open. I strolled on site and walked right in, and so I imagine in this environment, if there's wild birds or any other just contaminants, and I think the cleaning and disinfection probably could have been improved. So I imagine there'd be constant, passing on of the illness. And he was buying them in groups because they're quite expensive to buy initially. I think they're about $20 a bird. And so to buy them, he'd buy small groups as well as start his own breeding stock, so it was constant new birds being brought in as well.
Vicky or Eric, do you want to comment? Sure. Vicky is one of the avian pathologists out at the Animal Health Center in Abbotsford.
I just want to comment that, in fact, the squab industry is fairly significant in British Columbia, and this is a really common finding. And so the actions on this, my concern is that what is going to happen whenever we get a detection, we start to really aggressively respond to these outbreaks. I have the same question as you did, is what is the follow-up? Because we know the latency is a classic presentation of this disease, so is there any kind of follow-up testing? Who's going to pay for it, or do we expect the producer to do that? Do we expect depopulation? It certainly can be managed and controlled in breeders through treatment with antibiotics, but nobody's really monitoring this. So I think the expectation that this has been cleaned up should be dispensed with testing for it again. And I think this is a good test case to maybe figure out what the follow-up will look like. But there can be very strong implications within that industry. They're very suspicious of government, and I'm surprised you had the compliance you did with this producer. So a word of caution, I think this is where it's great to have these communications between the scientists, but when it comes to actually impacting somebody's business, and I think we have to be very conscious. So those are just some comments.
Yeah, I agree, because I mean that was the first thing they kind of asked is, well, you know, are our birds going to be killed? You know, the avian influenza thing was on their mind.
Okay, another question? Sorry.
Yeah, it actually kind of picks up on what you were saying, because I remember we're talking about avian influenza later, but I remember when we had the first outbreak here, the talk was, well, how are we going to respond to every single detection of avian influenza that we get now? My point I wanted to raise was I'm just learning about these new guidelines, and how much work do we need to do with the vets and the farmers to actually make them aware that we actually have these guidelines and we're going to be starting to follow them now? Did they have any sense of understanding of what you were following and the guidelines you were following?
Once I spoke to them, yes, it was, I mean, the vet was fine. I explained that I was, you know, following up because we'd received a report and were concerned about human health, and as well as the farm, you know, they were very cooperative. I didn't have anyone resist sharing information or speaking openly that I ran across. And the whole thing really was settled very quickly. Like,
Sorry, the question is, were the guidelines a surprise to the producer or the veterinarians involved?
I don't know if they were surprised or if it even really mattered to them. I don't know. They say everyone was very helpful and very communicative and shared very openly, and I don't know that it was just because I called and asked nicely or because they were feeling obliged because of the guidelines.
Yeah, I think there has been some communication with the province's veterinarians through their college, but certainly something I think we recognize at the Ministry of Agriculture we're going to have to do some more work. These are just talking about the reportable diseases. The zoonotic diseases are reportable. There's an extensive list of other non-zoonotic diseases that are now also reportable to the chief veterinarians of BC. Okay, sorry Chelsea, I think we're going to, for the sake of time, keep things moving. So thank you very much, Andrea, for your talk this morning.